Beggar girl helps millionaire save his son from his stepmother's abuse, but moments later, something terrible happens. Please rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The scream cut through the muggy afternoon air like a razor, echoing through the cobblestone streets of the historic town at precisely 3 o'clock. The 52-year-old millionaire almost dropped his coffee cup as he stepped away from the window of his luxurious apartment overlooking downtown. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. For 3 weeks straight, that sound had been coming from the clapboard house across the street, a faded yellow two-story with peeling blue shutters that starkly contrasted with the elegance of the modern high-rise where he lived. "Must be a kid's tantrum," he muttered to himself, adjusting his tie before returning to work. As the owner of the largest construction company in the region, he was used to solving complex problems, but he preferred to stay out of other people's dramas. Especially after 5 years of living alone, since he lost his wife on a rainy night, he preferred not to remember. His investments in the stock market had multiplied his fortune, but money didn't fill the void in his heart. Across the street, inside the clapboard house, the 4-year-old girl huddled in the corner of the kitchen, her small arms unable to grasp why her aunt hated her so much. The 38-year-old woman tightly held a metal spoon she had heated on the electric stove, her eyes red from the cheap vodka she'd been drinking since noon at O'Malley's bar down the street. "You're a pest in this house," the aunt hissed, her voice slurred. "Because of you, my sister is gone. Because of you, I lost everything." The spoon came down hard on the girl's small arm, leaving a red mark that joined the other scars that dotted her thin limbs. The child bit her lip to keep from screaming louder. She had learned that screams only enraged her aunt further, who had worked at City Hall until she was fired for constant absences caused by her addiction. The girl closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's soft voice, singing that lullaby before bed. It was all that was left of her now, fragments of memories and a melody that insisted on echoing in her mind during the most painful moments. "Stop whimpering," the aunt grunted, putting the spoon back in the drawer as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you get charcoal on the walls again, you'll see what real punishment is." The girl ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stuffy space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall. There, she curled up in the thin sheet and began to hum her mother's song softly, the only thing that still comforted her. She didn't know that, across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody. The businessman stopped reviewing the contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound. He knew that song. His late wife used to sing it when she was cooking, a folk song about free birds. But where was it coming from? He approached the window again, his eyes scanning the facade of the clapboard house. One of the back windows was ajar, and from there came that childish voice, trembling but persistent. For the first time in 3 weeks, he felt something other than simple annoyance. There was something in that voice that touched a sensitive chord in his chest, something that reminded him of responsibilities long buried under layers of work and isolation. His net worth in financial investments was constantly growing, but his emotional life remained stagnant. Next door to the clapboard house, the 61-year-old retired schoolteacher was watering her begonias when she heard the girls singing. Unlike the millionaire, she could no longer ignore the signs. During her 40 years teaching elementary school, she had developed a sixth sense for children in distress, and that voice carried a pain that made her heart clench. "That's strange," she thought, observing the windows of the family's house that she had known for decades. The aunt had always been troubled, but since she took custody of her orphaned niece, something had changed in the air of that house. The girl never played in the yard, never ran through the streets like the other children in the historic town. The teacher dried her hands on her apron and made a decision. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy call to her neighbor. It had been a long time since she had properly talked to the child's aunt, and maybe it was time to get to know the little girl better. The sun began to set over the mountains surrounding the town when the girl finally fell asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. Her small fingers clutched the sheet, and in her dreams she flew like the birds she secretly drew on the kitchen walls with pieces of charcoal found in the yard. Across the street, the businessman closed the curtains and tried to get back to work, but he couldn't concentrate. Something had changed that afternoon, something he didn't yet fully understand. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe it was time to pay attention to what was happening beyond his own windows. His investment profits continued to grow, but his soul remained empty. The next morning brought the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical hustle and bustle of the historic town awakening to another day. The retired schoolteacher put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that wouldn't leave her alone, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years as an educator. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the Clappard house. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps approached. The aunt opened the door with a puffy face and red eyes, clearly suffering the effects of the previous night's binge. "Good morning," the teacher said, with her gentlest smile. "I came to pay a courtesy call. It's been so long since we've had a proper conversation." The aunt hesitated, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "Oh, teacher, It's not a good time. The house is a mess." "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." The teacher took a step forward, forcing the aunt to retreat. "And I would love to meet your niece. I hear she's an adorable little girl." The aunt's face hardened for an instant before forcing a weak smile. "The girl is sick. High fever. Better not to get close." At that moment, a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the floor. The teacher pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. "Maybe I can help," the educator insisted. "I have experience with sick children. I raised 3 kids. You know how it is." "No need. No," the aunt replied quickly, blocking the entrance with her body. "I already took her to the doctor. It's just a flu. It'll pass soon." The teacher noticed the aunt's nervous hands, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the strong smell of alcohol emanating from her, even though it was so early. All the signs she had learned to recognize during decades of dealing with troubled families. Across the street, the businessman watched the scene from his window while having breakfast. He had woken up earlier than usual, disturbed by confusing dreams where a child's voice mingled with memories of his deceased wife. When he saw the teacher at the door of the Clappard house, a strange curiosity washed over him. The educator finally said goodbye to the aunt, but not before casting an inquisitive look into the interior of the house. There was something deeply wrong there, and her experience told her that a child was suffering. As she walked back to her house, she decided that she needed to find a way to verify her suspicions. Inside the clapboard house, the aunt slammed the door shut and headed to the kitchen, where she found the girl crouching behind the table, trying to hide. The child had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height didn't allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" the aunt snarled, her irritation intensified by the hangover and the unexpected visit. "I was thirsty," the girl murmured, her big eyes fixed on the floor. "Thirsty?" The aunt laughed bitterly. "You want water? Then go get it in the yard. And since you like to make so much noise, you can stay out there until I decide you can come in." The girl went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high fences and dominated by a single mango tree. There, she sat on the ground and began to draw with a piece of charcoal she had found near the electric stove. They were always birds, small, large, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. Each stroke represented her dream of freedom, of flying away from that house where pain was her only constant companion. The hours passed slowly. The aunt had locked the back door, leaving the girl in the yard under the strong midday sun. The child began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So she began to sing her mother's song softly, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached the businessman's ears again. This time, he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar about that voice, that specific song. He picked up his cell phone and, almost without thinking, began to record. He didn't know exactly why, but an instinct told him that he might need that evidence. As he recorded, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind. His former employee used to hum that same song while working. The kind woman who had been an exemplary employee until she disappeared abruptly 5 years ago. The employee who always spoke fondly about her young daughter, a girl named her daughter, murmured the businessman, his cell phone trembling in his hands. The daughter of his former employee was named exactly like the child suffering in the house across the street. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The child suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the kind woman who had worked for him for 3 years before simply disappearing. How hadn't he made that connection before? The businessman put away his cell phone and began to pace back and forth in his apartment. He vaguely remembered his former employee mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties. But he was so absorbed in his own problems at the time, the growing conflicts with his wife, the problems in the company, that he hadn't paid due attention. His investment funds were growing exponentially, but he had completely ignored the human suffering around him. Now, 5 years later, the daughter of his ex-employee was across the street, and from the sounds coming from that house, she wasn't in a good situation. The guilt he carried for the loss of his wife multiplied, now including regret for not helping his employee when she clearly needed it. At 3 o'clock, sharp, the screams started again. This time, the businessman didn't turn away from the window. He watched with growing horror as, through the kitchen window of the Clapboard house, he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He picked up his cell phone again and began to record, this time with more determination. What he saw through the cell phone screen made him nauseous. The aunt was holding something in her hands. It seemed to be a kitchen utensil, and gesticulating violently in the direction of a small figure that he could barely distinguish. The girl's screams echoed through the afternoon, and this time the businessman couldn't pretend they were just childish tantrums. When the silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that would change everything. The question now was, what would he do with that information? His capital accumulated over the years gave him the power to act, but decades of emotional isolation had made him a coward in the face of complex human situations. That night, the girl slept on the floor of the backyard, where her aunt had left her as punishment for making too much noise during the afternoon. The child curled up in her own t-shirt and looked at the stars through the branches of the mango tree. In her 4-year-old mind, she made a silent wish to her mother, wherever she was, that someone, anyone, would take her away from that place of pain. Across the street, the businessman couldn't sleep, tormented by the certainty that he needed to act, but paralyzed by the same emotional inertia that had consumed him since his wife's departure. His financial assets were worth millions, but his moral courage seemed to have been buried along with his heart. 3 days had passed since the businessman discovered the identity of the child, and guilt consumed him like a slow fire. During these days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 o'clock, always with the same methodical brutality. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by the same cowardice that had haunted him since the night he lost his wife. On that Thursday morning, the teacher made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering just a few feet from her house. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and all of them were present in the clapboard house. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of attempting another direct visit to the aunt, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place from which she had the best view of the backyard of the clapboard house. What she saw horrified her. The girl was sitting under the mango tree, completely alone, wearing only a torn t-shirt and underwear. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed. The child was drawing on the ground with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that the teacher recognized as birds. "My God," whispered the educator, her hands trembling as she held the fence that separated the yards. It was worse than she imagined. Much worse. The girl looked up and saw the lady watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Then, to the teacher's surprise, the child smiled, a faint but genuine smile, and waved shyly. "Hi, Grandma," the girl said in her tiny voice, using the affectionate term she gave to all elderly ladies. "Hi, sweetie," the teacher replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you okay?" The girl glanced quickly at the windows of the house before answering. "Yes, I am. I'm just drawing birdies." "That's nice. Do you like birds?" "I like them a lot. They can fly wherever they want," the child replied, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke the educator's heart. At that moment, the aunt's harsh voice echoed from inside the house. "Girl, where are you?" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything the teacher needed to know. The girl got up quickly, wiped her hands on her t-shirt and ran inside the house, but not before looking once more at the educator with an expression that screamed for help. The teacher remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had seen. The burns, the fear, the way the child reacted to the aunt's voice, everything confirmed her worst fears. She could no longer pretend she didn't know what was happening. Meanwhile, across the street, the businessman had witnessed the entire interaction. Through his window, he could see the yard partially, and the sight of the marks on the girl's arms made him nauseous. For the first time in 5 years, he felt a genuine fury burning in his chest. His former employee had trusted him in some way. Even if indirectly, even if he didn't know it at the time, she had left her daughter in the care of a family that lived in the same town where he lived. And now this child was being tortured while he watched from his comfortable window, paralyzed by his own cowardice. His monthly dividends arrived punctually in his accounts, but his humanity seemed to have been lost among the numbers. At 11 in the morning, the teacher made a courageous decision. She put on her best business attire, took a tray of homemade cookies she had prepared as a pretext, and headed again to the clapboard house. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. The aunt answered the door reluctantly, clearly annoyed by the neighbor's insistence. "Teacher, I already told you it's not a good time." "Honey, I brought some cookies I made yesterday," the educator interrupted firmly, "and I insist on getting to know the little one better. As long-time neighbors, it's our duty to support each other." Before the aunt could protest, the teacher had already entered the house, using all the authority that decades of classroom experience had given her. The interior of the clapboard house was dark and smelled of mildew mixed with alcohol. Old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. "The girl is sleeping," the aunt lied, blocking the way to the back of the house. "That's a shame." "Maybe another time, then," said the teacher, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. Dark stains on the kitchen floor that seemed to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left on the electric stove, and especially small charcoal drawings on the walls that clearly had been made by a child. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible. The teacher and the aunt froze. The silence that followed was tense and revealing. "It must be the neighbor's cat," the aunt said quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. The educator smiled and nodded, but had decided she had already seen enough. "Well, I'll let you rest then. But remember that I'm always here next door if you need anything. Anything at all." The teacher's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning. After the educator left, the aunt slammed the door shut and headed to the kitchen, where she found the girl huddled behind the electric stove, trying to hide. The child had cried upon hearing the teacher's gentle voice, remembering the kindness she had once known. "You were making noise," the aunt accused, her eyes already shining with familiar fury. "No, aunt, I didn't make noise," the girl protested, but her small voice sounded weak even to herself. The aunt picked up the metal spoon that was on the stove and placed it directly on the burner. The girl recognized the ritual and began to tremble. She knew what was coming next. "You want to get attention, don't you?" the aunt hissed as the spoon heated up. "You want the neighbors to come here asking questions. You think I don't know how to take care of you." Across the street, the businessman had positioned his cell phone at the window and was recording again. This time, he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything. He could no longer be just a silent observer. His former employee had been a good person, a dedicated employee who always spoke of her daughter with love. This child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. His passive income from investments was constantly growing, but his moral responsibility had been stagnant for too long. As the girl suffered another episode of systematic torture, the businessman made a call he hadn't made in months. He called his personal lawyer and former college friend. "Robert, I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching from the window as the girl's screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it could be a matter of life or death." On the other end of the line, the lawyer noticed something different in his friend's voice. In the 5 years since the loss of his wife, the businessman had become a closed-off person, focused only on expanding his fortune through business and financial speculation. Hearing genuine concern in his voice was something completely new. "Demetrius, what exactly are you talking about?" the lawyer asked, using the real name that had escaped in the call due to the emotional state. "I need you to come here tomorrow morning," the businessman replied, correcting himself quickly. "I have evidence of something terrible happening. A child is being abused, and I knew her parents." That night, after the aunt fell asleep, drunk on the living room couch, the girl managed to slip silently into the backyard. Her new burns stung, but the physical pain was less than the pain in her heart. She sat under the mango tree and looked at the stars, humming her mother's song softly. What she didn't know was that, for the first time in months, someone was truly paying attention to her suffering, and that in the coming days, her life would change in ways she couldn't even imagine. Across the street, the businessman watched the small silhouette in the backyard, finally determined to transform his accumulated fortune into something that really mattered: saving a life. The lawyer arrived at the businessman's apartment on Friday morning with a serious expression on his face. The two men had been colleagues at the university for almost 3 decades, and Robert knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after the loss of his wife. That's why the urgent phone call the previous night had surprised him so much. "I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," Robert said, sitting in the spacious living room of the apartment. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need details." The businessman served coffee and positioned himself near the window. the place that had become his obsession in recent days. The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine. She's being abused by the aunt who takes care of her. Abused how? Robert asked, taking a notepad from his briefcase. Burns, daily screams, neglect. The businessman paused, struggling with the words. I have recordings, Robert. Evidence of what's happening. Robert was silent for a moment, processing the information. This is very serious. If you have evidence of child abuse, you need to contact Child Protective Services immediately. I know, the businessman replied, running his hands over his face. But there's something more. The child's mother worked for me for 3 years. She left abruptly in 2019, a few months before my wife's accident. I never understood why, but now you feel responsible, Robert completed, understanding the emotional complexity of the situation. The businessman nodded. If I had paid more attention at the time, maybe I could have helped. Maybe she wouldn't have had to leave her daughter with that woman. At that moment, the familiar sound of screams echoed from the house across the street. Even though it was only 9 in the morning, both men turned to the window, and Robert could see the expression of anguish on his friend's face. Does this happen every day? He asked, horrified. At 3 in the afternoon, religiously. But sometimes at other times as well, the businessman replied, picking up his cell phone. Want to see the recordings? Robert watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As a lawyer specializing in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse, but something about the systematization of that violence deeply disturbed him. We can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all these recordings today. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and the district attorney. This child needs to be removed from that house immediately. While the two men planned the intervention across the street, the girl was living another day of terror. The aunt had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more alcohol in the house. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that the girl had made on the kitchen wall during the early morning hours. How many times do I have to tell you not to get charcoal on the walls? The aunt yelled, grabbing the girl by the arm hard enough to leave marks. You're a pest, a curse in this house. The girl tried to explain, to say that she had dreamed of her mother and that the drawings made her feel less alone, but the words were lost in sobs. At 4 years old, she still didn't fully understand why her aunt hated her so much, why each day brought new pain. Simultaneously, the teacher had made her own courageous decision. She went directly to the downtown area of the historic town, where the small office of Child Protective Services was located. She knew the counselor well, a former student of hers who had dedicated herself to the protection of vulnerable children. Anna, I need to talk to you about a very serious situation, the teacher said, entering the office without ceremony. The counselor raised her eyes from the papers she was analyzing. Teacher, it's good to see you. What brings you here today? A child in danger, my neighbor. I'm sure she's being abused. The counselor straightened in her chair, her expression becoming immediately serious. During her 5 years as a Child Protective Services counselor, she had learned to recognize when a complaint was serious, and the teacher was not the type of person who would make frivolous accusations. Tell me everything, Anna said, picking up a complaint form. While the teacher was reporting her observations across town, Robert was in a similar meeting in the office of the district attorney. The prosecutor listened attentively as Robert presented the evidence collected by the businessman. This is compelling evidence, the prosecutor said, examining the videos on Robert's cell phone. I will order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment. How long will that take? Robert asked, worried. With this evidence? We can act today, the prosecutor replied. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services now. It was thus that, by a coincidence that would change the girl's fate, 2 simultaneous complaints reached Child Protective Services on the same morning. The counselor was finishing writing down the teacher's account when her phone rang. Child Protective Services, Anna speaking. Anna, this is District Attorney Lucas. I need you to make an urgent intervention at a house on Main Street in the historic town. We have evidence of serious child abuse. Anna paused, the pen suspended over the paper. Is it by any chance the yellow clapboard house? Exactly. How did you know? I just received a complaint about the same house, Anna replied, looking at the teacher with surprise. 2 independent sources. This confirms the seriousness of the situation. At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being set up. Anna, accompanied by 2 social workers and a court officer, was heading to Main Street. The teacher had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. The businessman was watching everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. Robert was beside him, both witnessing the moment that would change the girl's life forever. You did the right thing, Robert said, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. I hope it's not too late, the businessman replied, his eyes fixed on the team approaching the clapboard house. In the house, the aunt had gone out to buy alcohol at O'Malley's bar, leaving the girl locked in the stuffy room. The child continued to sing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When Anna knocked on the door of the clapboard house and received no answer, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside surpassed even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, a strong smell of alcohol, and obvious signs of neglect in all the rooms. It was the teacher who first heard the weak voice coming from the room in the back. There's someone here, she said, guiding the team down the hallway. When they opened the door to the room and found the girl huddled in the corner, singing her sad song, everyone present felt a pang in their heart. The child raised her big, frightened eyes, not understanding who those people were or what they wanted from her. Hi, sweetie, Anna said, crouching down to be at the child's height. My name is Anna. We're here to help you. The girl looked at the teacher, recognizing the kind lady who had talked to her in the yard. A flash of hope shone in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by fear. The aunt will be angry, she whispered. You don't have to worry about that now, the teacher said, reaching out to the child. Let's get out of here, okay? The girl's exit from the clapboard house was a moment that would be etched in the memory of everyone present. The child held the teacher's hand tightly, her steps small and hesitant as she crossed the threshold that had been her prison for so many months. Across the street, the businessman watched the scene, a mixture of relief and anxiety consuming his chest. When the girl passed in front of his building, he quickly went downstairs and approached the team. Excuse me, he said, addressing the counselor. I was the one who provided the evidence. I would like to know, what will happen to her now? Anna looked at the well-dressed man, recognizing in him the same genuine concern she had seen in the teacher. She will be taken to a temporary shelter while we investigate the situation and look for suitable relatives. And if there are no suitable relatives? The businessman asked, his voice trembling slightly. The counselor studied the man's face for a moment. Then we will look for a suitable foster family. Why? The businessman looked at the girl, who watched the conversation with her big sad eyes. Something in his chest broke definitively. Because I would like to adopt her. The statement surprised everyone, including Robert, who had accompanied his friend to the street. The teacher smiled through her tears, recognizing that this child had touched the hearts of more people than she imagined. It will be a long process, Anna explained. Evaluations, documentation, preparation. I have resources, the businessman said, his voice gaining firmness. I can provide the best medical care, education, therapy, everything she needs. His fortune accumulated in stocks and investments would finally have a true purpose. The girl approached the businessman shyly. You're the man from the window, she said in her small voice. I always saw you looking. The businessman's heart broke as he realized that she had noticed his presence all those days. "I'm so sorry I didn't help sooner," he said, crouching down to be at her height. "You helped now," the child replied, offering him a faint but genuine smile. 6 months later, the girl was running through the garden of a large house on the outskirts of town, her arms finally free of scars after intensive medical treatment. The businessman had fulfilled his promise, offering her not only a safe home, but also genuine love. The teacher had become a constant presence in their lives, acting as an affectionate grandmother. The child discovered that she had a talent for drawing, and her walls were now covered with colorful birds, no longer symbols of escape, but of freedom conquered. And every night, before going to sleep, she still sang her mother's song, but now with the certainty that she was safe and loved. The businessman had discovered that his true wealth was not in his material possessions, but in the ability to transform lives. And the girl had learned that even in the darkest moments, there is always someone willing to reach out to those who need help. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story, please comment with a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.